Susan, and I'm going to go through a few slides. I'm not here to talk for an entire hour because we actually want to get a lot of feedback from you all. This is a workshop, but I wanted to do a little bit of scene setting here. So our goal is to work with you. Really, this is the beginning of Susan mentioned in the introduction, a project that we call the Shale Play Infrastructure, Communications and Public Safety. This is a beginning of trying to get a baseline of what the needs are on the public safety side and also on the communications side. So that's part of what we're here for today. I won't spend a lot of time on this. You saw various different forms of this. Production is increasing exponentially, and particularly because of the shale plays, and that's pretty much why we're all here. Right? Some of the local government challenges, and this is out of the economic impact study that was done by WTxEC, and I do want to take the opportunity at this point to correct one error that my colleague from WTxEC made earlier. He mentioned that there are 3 Tier 1 universities in the state of Texas. There's Rice, there's UT, there's A&M, and there is a 4th. It's the University of Houston. So I want to correct that. My president and chancellor would not let me let that one stand. But if you look at the report, and there's several reports that are now up on the website, and in addition to the brief report that he talked about this morning, population growth is explosive, but what they're projecting is it's not going to be boom towns, right? It's going to be a little bit more controlled growth. I don't know what that means. We've seen exponential growth, so if that's not a boom town, hopefully what they mean by that is not boom and bust, but it's going to be continued growth, maybe tapering off, and that's what we're seeing in some of the demographics. People's concerns evolve over time, and a lot of that has to do with the types of operations that are happening. You have drilling operations, then you go into production. There are different activities happening. People become more aware of what's going on with the industry. They become more comfortable with certain issues after time. They become more concerned about other issues after time. We've heard a lot of them: water, roads, health, safety, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about safety today, but safety and communications are ones that are impacted by this tremendous growth, as well as roads and water. One of the things that, and I'll come back to that. In the short run, road and traffic conditions are the most important ones, water probably being the next one that you've heard a lot about. Communication is very important. Communication not only in terms of a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, infrastructure of communication, but also the different entities actually being able to communicate with each other, understand each other, cooperate with each other. Water and environmental concerns, we've talked about that. And then appropriate use of revenues, which have also been included. So that's some of the scene setting from some of the studies done by WTxEC. I want to go through some vignettes here. This was the executive director of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors did a presentation, and I pulled some information from his presentation. This is out of the Marcellus Shale, so a little bit different than what we're dealing with here. I actually come from originally that area of the country, and while the first well drilled was in Titusville, actually Oil City, Pennsylvania, I'm not so certain that my fellow Pennsylvanians and Ohioans know a whole lot about drilling these days. So, there are many types of incidences. A lot of incidences on sites require specialty equipment and so forth. There are a lot of different parts of the environment and so forth that responders aren't necessarily used to dealing with or aware of. So that was one of the things. Dispatchers needed to know who to contact. They ran into, I love the right side of this slide, which is we've got a fire somewhere off of Ridge Hill Road. Not quite sure where it's at, but the site was actually a mile off the main road. It had one way in and one way out. Someone might think about having more than one way in and one way out, but they obviously didn't. Rough terrain, and the only way they could fight that fire was with mobile water. Okay, so this was an example where there probably were a number of things where industry and the first response communities and so forth needed to communicate before anything ever happened. And then there were the issues of when something did happen, how did they need to communicate and so forth. The cellular infrastructure is being stretched. There's an article here about Eagleford and loss of cellular coverage, calls being dropped, so on and so forth. The challenge there, this article was in March of 2012, and the year prior to that, the populations in Karnes County, which it talked about, had doubled. We also heard this morning that with people coming into regions to work as temporary workers, they're not necessarily counted as part of the population. So, but while they're there, they still use the infrastructure. We talked about roads and other things. Cellular phones and so forth, they're bringing a lot of devices with them and so on. When you think about it from the telecommunications industry standpoint, if they're going to build out infrastructure, they want to understand the demand. Usually, they're used to looking at demand in terms of population. If they don't understand what the additional temporary population might be for people who are mobile workers and so forth, that might change their thinking about what they're going to do in terms of investing in infrastructure. So the traditional cellular providers are having a very hard time predicting what the demand is and trying to get ahead of that. This was a recent incident in April 30th, a little over a month ago. In Logan County, there was an explosion after a pressure buildup from a separator. Logan County is the most sparsely populated county in the U.S. There were 2 deaths and 9 injuries. Now, when we looked at this, it was the fact that an employee on site had to drive 6 miles, first of all, be able to get a cellular signal to call 911. Okay, once they called 911, the emergency response took 40 minutes to get there. Okay, now, in the end, did it change anything for those people? The sheriff who was interviewed on this said, no, the 2 people were already dead. They would have still been dead. Didn't matter how long it took. The 9 people that were injured, there were minor injuries and so forth. So in this particular incident, it probably would not have changed the outcome to have better infrastructure in place. But the fact that this happened is a warning signal. Okay? So those are just some of the background that we wanted to go into on this. And the structure of this session really is, I'm done talking. Now you can all get up and leave, but that's not what we want, because we want to actually get your input. Okay, and we suspect that you probably fall into about 4 groups. So we've got first responders, emergency response personnel. I'm sure we've got some people here from the oil and gas industry. All of you are members of the public. And then I'm sure we probably have some government, whether federal, state, municipal, county, government officials and so forth. So I want to go through each of these groups, and this is where we get interactive. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want to get some answers from you all, okay? And then we're going to do an exercise that I hope you'll find fun. I've done it a couple of times. It's always had a pretty good impact. Because at first what we're going to do is we're going to look at how you see the world today and what you think the challenges are. Then we're going to take a little trip. Okay? That's all I'll say for now. So, how many first responders do we have in the total? First response community, emergency response. So good.
You're asking in here?
Yeah, in here, right now. Okay? So about 4 people. Any of you volunteers? Okay? 2, about half of that volunteers. Okay? How many of you are employed in the oil and gas industry? 2, 3. The first responders, that is. Okay? So, and here's one example. Gentlemen, I'm not going to point you out. We have a person. And this is part of what we see in some of the things that we're starting to look at is you're going to have, particularly for volunteer first responders, you're going to have people who are from the industry. And they're going to understand when they get to a site, what's on the site and what they can do. You're also going to have volunteers who are not from the industry. Right? So part of what we need to understand is how do we get everybody who is responding to a site, and I will point out one of our colleagues, Brad, here from Shell, and this is part of his job, is to how do you get people on a level playing field in terms of understanding when you get to a site, what's there, who's doing what role, and how do you deal with that. So let me ask all you first responders, first of all, do you have a clear idea of what the unique challenges are if you were to go to an oil and gas site as an emergency responder?
Yes, sir. And I have history with that for the area.
Okay, we've got a very strong yes, sir. I know what to do. I've had experience. Are all of you on the same level?
No, sir.
No. Okay. So if you're all going to be at a site sometime, there's probably a minimum level we need you to be comfortable with in terms of what you're going to see and what you're going to encounter. Okay? So that's part of what may be one of our challenges. So when you respond to an oil and gas site, are you clear on what the roles are for everybody who's engaged in that emergency response?
No.
Pretty much, but it depends on who gets there first and who knows more according to the NIMS compliance.
Okay, I've got a no, pretty much, but it depends.
And again, where I came from is that part of our volunteer base were people that were members of DART teams.
Right.
So they were able to interact, and the chief would step back, and that's who would handle that. So we knew who the players were and who were industry DART members or that handled that professionally, who were also secondary roles on our volunteers. And so that's who led those situations.
So that's a very good example, because what he just said there was our normal leader knew we had experts on the team. And when we encountered that situation, he would step back and let them lead in that particular case. Okay? There may be times, because we've had some conversations elsewhere, where you get there as a first responder and, let's face it, what is your first concern to do the job you came there to do, right? Whatever the emergency response is that you're responsible for. But there may be industry people on the site who know more about the site and what's going on than you do. Knowing when you rely on somebody else's expertise and when you don't complicates this situation a great deal, right? So in that particular case, because you've got a group, volunteers that are used to working with each other, they've trained with each other, they know if I encounter this, the normal command structure is going to change and these people are going to lead us, right? Now, if they happen to be in a multi-unit response, their unit knows that and another unit doesn't.
That other unit's in trouble.
That other unit's in trouble, okay? And if you're coming to a site and you don't know what to encounter, and the fact that perhaps the normal way you would approach a situation could be altered. When somebody tells you it needs to be altered, how's that going to make you feel? Just like you feel right now, right? Uncertain at the very least, right? And let's face it, you do not want uncertainty when you're in an emergency situation, right? Okay, so these are just, all I'm trying to point out with some of these questions is that these are environments that some of you are comfortable with, some of you are familiar with, others of you have thought about it, and you wouldn't necessarily be surprised, and others of you have not had the opportunity to be engaged in that kind of an environment. And so might not even be aware that you're going to be challenged in different ways. Okay? So let me ask you, what challenges do you face in delivering your responses in these kinds of environments?
Lack of training.
Lack of training. Anything else? Communication infrastructure.
In the volunteer side of it is communication equipment for one, older fire response equipment. Those are the two biggest, and then of course training, knowing what's on that site.
Okay, let me ask. So training equipment, fire response equipment, and communication. I heard communication, training. So those are all important things. Let me ask you on the communication side specifically, because when we look at response, you've got your radio communications and so forth that you use internally to your organizations. You've got your coordination with other entities, and you've got the way that we all default to communicate these days, which is cell phones and so forth. Which of those areas do you think are most challenging in the environments out here right now?
Cell phone connection.
Cell phone connection?
And even some of the traditional radio system, I mean, everybody has the required mutual aid channels and everything. It's just that we get to some of the terrain and the infrastructure is so antiquated, it wasn't part of the Homeland Security update.
All right, so even in the dedicated radio infrastructure, you've got infrastructure that hasn't been updated and so forth, and
That's
terrain
the
and
thing.
other issues.
But recently, they made us all go to narrowband.
Yeah.
A lot of the radios weren't narrowbandable, so they had been taken out of service. We use grants through COG and other places to help fund that.
Right.
A lot of the towers, repeaters were not narrowbandable, so a lot of the stuff needs to be updated. A lot of the volunteers and the counties don't have the money to do that. That is a big issue. Because in some of those areas, cell service is none,
Right.
hills and everything else.
Okay, so you've had a switch in the technology used on your radio. You've got issues with your towers. There may be towers there, but they can't use the new narrowband technology.
Correct.
So you've got issues there. And then you have, and that was just internally, and I did hear, this is the one is always fun to ask, and that's what about the coordination between multiple responses, because we still don't have,
Well, we just, through the West Texas Central Council of Governments, several counties, there's about 18 in this area, that have updated all their mutual aid agreements. So there's a step there already being done. Typically in this area, we don't have the training to deal with oil field fires as tank batteries, things like that. When you get out there, there is no water supply, so we need to haul water. A lot of the smaller volunteer fire departments don't have water supply, so we have to rely on bigger departments to bring water to us. Yeah.
okay, so mutual aid still a challenge. You've got a good footprint here in terms of new mutual aid agreements, water, training, again, so forth. Yes.
Comment I want to make to the group here, I represent on the healthcare side Hendrick Medical Center. We have a regional medical operations center for the 16 surrounding counties here, tied to all the hospitals that are in those counties. But our challenge has always been is getting notified out in the field if there's a mass casualty event, and of course with this boom in oil and a lot of folks coming out this way, is the first receivers, first responders getting out there is one thing, but communicating what's going on back to those medical facilities so that they can be adequately prepared to receive, as opposed to something all of a sudden showing up the door is the challenge. And it is tied to those pieces of communication. We have the same issues too.
So what typically is the form of communication you would get by what means from the field?
A lot of it is our outer, like my outer hospitals there, letting the regional medical operations center, Hendrick, know about what's going on so that we can start coordinating if it is a large scale mass casualty.
Is that
incident.
coming in from EMS units
Yes.
back to the hospitals?
Yes. But
Okay.
again, there are some issues with the way we communicate. Like in cell phones can be a bit sketchy there. The radio system is another problem.
Okay, so EMS communicating back to you would be primarily by radio, fall back to cell phone. If you've got bad infrastructure on the radio and they go to fall back and they can't get a cellular system, there's no communication. Is that an accurate scenario?
Yeah, so my name's Danny Epps, I come with the Concho Valley Regional Advisory Council, based in San Angelo, so I serve a 14-county area. The RACs, the Regional Advisory Council, are the perfect avenue for that communication thing. I mean, because we do that already. We already have the contacts for the hospital, for the EMS, for all those people. And my area has gotten very good about notifying the RAC when there is an event, even a small event in their area, just be on the lookout for it to be getting bigger, or if they need help or something like that. All the EMSs all sign a MOA every year. They update it with, you know, the entire rack so that they can be called upon and used, and that's already in place and everything.
So where's the closest ambulance bus in the RAC network from here?
So we're associated with EMTF 9 out of El Paso. We are assured though that if we need one of the state of Texas, we have ambuses, haul 20 patients, medical equipped, all that. We could get one out of Lubbock, Austin, San Antonio. So that's our closest one to our area. But you're looking at, you know, possibly an hour to get it on the road and then a 3 to 4 hour drive time.
Okay, so if you needed an ambulance, probably the soonest you could get it there is, we're saying 4 to maybe 6 hours.
I love it to us.
Well, for me, now Lubbock and coming somewhere in this area, probably a little bit quicker now.
Okay,
But
so we might cut that down to start at 3 hours.
3 hours.
3 hours, after they're notified.
Yes.
Best
Okay.
case scenario.
Best case scenario, 3 hours.
Well, the ideal would be to get an EMTF out in West Texas with this growth that's happening. That would be ideal, but again, that's gonna take a lot of coordination to do.
And there has been talk of an entire EMTF out here. There has been talk of trying to get maybe an ambulance stationed in, you know, the Midland, Odessa area or somewhere like that. The problem is the price tag of it, and the federal funds that help buy all that stuff have no longer support buying moving vehicles and have been cut. You know, we took a 36% cut in our hospital preparedness program funding.
I know that for a fact myself.
Yeah.
But I will say, I'm Cline Thompson. I'm also a regional advisory with Midland Odessa, and we're looking at talking with the oil companies and purchasing an ambulance and have it there in the Midland Odessa.
Good. All right. So you've already started answering the next one, which is what would make it more effective, help you to be more effective. We've got one example over here. We've already heard about training. We've heard about radio communications, cellular communications. Are there other things that you can think of that would make you more effective in responding in these environments?
Training from the oil companies.
Training from the oil companies?
Would it be helpful with all the water trucks that oil companies have? Is there any interoperability where they can bring water to
Oh,
the fire site?
we do that, we have 2 oil companies that, or not oil companies, they're actually water transport companies that they told us that we have agreements with them. If we have a big fire, we call them, they bring us water, they volunteer. So that's pretty much all set up. But it'd be more or less that, like in this part of the, I guess here south, a lot of the older technology, older tank batteries, a lot of stuff that barely meets code is in those areas that a lot of volunteers are going to deal with. As you go more west and north, you're going to get some of the newer stuff. The volunteer side, we need to be basic bottom line training about how to deal with tank batteries, what kind of phones work, just crash course basis, you know, how to shut down a separator, stuff like that, that we need just the basics from the oil companies. If they can help us with that, on the other side, you know, the cost of equipment is just tremendous. Volunteers, the department I'm from, I'm in the northern part of Coleman County. We're 100% volunteer, and we are 100% grant funded, whatever we can beg for. We get $75 a month from the county, that's it. We have 86 square miles to cover, and I know of 10 tank batteries, at least 4 tanks on every place, within 4 miles of my station, that I don't know that my equipment can handle that. I have, brush trucks and 1 structure truck, but my structure truck's a 71. So and a lot of the smaller volunteer departments are in that same shape. City of Sweetwater, City of Abilene, the bigger cities that are actually city funded, they've got newer equipment, but they're going to be the second response. A lot of the other stuff is going to be the first response. That's where we need oil companies to work with us and say, hey, we're going to give you a grant or something, to help buy a truck. They all go together to get a pipeline going through and say, we'll help you get this. Where in the past, nothing like that was there. they're gonna have them offer us a day or two a year. We can come down and kind of see where their infrastructure lies in our area, know if it's a 10-inch line running gas, or if it's a 10-inch line running oil, kind of where the valves are, and then we can tell them what our water supplies are. If there's no water supply, maybe that's where those mutual aid with water companies do come in handy.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm the emergency management coordinator for Glasscock County. I know you're talking about Coleman County.
Yes, ma'am.
We have actually 3 volunteer fire departments in Glasscock County who cover a 964-mile square radius. Radius. I mean, you're talking about tank batteries and 4 in that area or something. I mean, you're probably talking about 4,000 in our area.
Yeah.
Easily. And so I totally agree with what you're saying. But I will also say that the pipeline companies, if you call them, they will come. And they will do a tabletop discussion with you or however you want to do it. And they will talk about the pipelines and they will tell you exactly what's there.
Yeah.
And let you know exactly what's going on. They do it with us on a regular basis. And we know what the diameter of those pipes are, what the pressure is.
The
So,
pipeline companies that are regulated by DOT are required to proactively reach out to stakeholders within the area where the pipeline operates and offer it to them.
yeah. So if you'll call them, they'll be there.
Okay. Good. Well, that's very good. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next group, which some of you still participate in, and that's the oil and gas industry. Again, are you clear on the roles that you play when you have first responders on site? Brad's shaking his head yes. He's got to say yes. How many oil and gas industry people do we have here? So we've got 3. So and I know Nancy, so I'm talking to you guys over here. So and I think you guys actually gave a lot of your input on the previous one. So understanding unique challenges.
Ray, maybe we could ask it a different way.
Yeah.
For the first responders, when they engage with the oil and gas companies, are we all consistent? Do we all give you the same answer to what the roles are, depending on which companies you talk to, for your different regions?
Being that I've been in 3 different regions, the High Plains, South Plains, and now down here, it's been pretty much unilateral. I mean, it's just pretty much the response, comments, and tactics and cooperation has been the same from top to bottom.
Good to hear. And as far as working actively and doing drills and things like that with the oil and gas companies, has everyone participated in something like that?
I have.
You have? What about other folks?
Yes.
Let me say no.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Do that.
is that the separation we're seeing here? I mean, I don't know what unit you were involved with.
It's all been law enforcement emergency management.
Law enforcement emergency management. So primarily what we're getting here is that the volunteer side is perhaps not as engaged in tabletop exercises and so forth, exercises with the companies as the full-time or
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Well, let me kind of clarify when you say that. I mean, I think what we need to understand too, and somebody said earlier this morning, when you talk about the population and the population changing and whatever, West Texas is still considered, and when I talk about West Texas, I mean far West Texas,
Right.
is still considered frontier.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got counties with population less than 1 per, or less than 6 per square mile or whatever it is, that defines frontier.
right.
So when we talk about frontier and you talk about, well, are they working with the paid services, we have counties that have no town. I mean, have no city.
Right.
It's a
Right.
town. It's all volunteer. You have there's no paid, there's no,
Phone is different from a landline, right?
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, in southern Taylor County and Coleman County, if you're on a certain tower, if you're on the east side of the county, if you're right outside this little town, probably close to the center, if you dial 911, you're getting Brown County. If you're on this side of it, you're going to get Coleman County, and if you go to the northern part of Coleman County, you're going to get Callahan County because it's the towers. We've had numerous situations where there's been a car wreck called in somewhere by the county line. When they call 911, it goes to the surrounding county. That county has to call this county has to dispatch out because You cannot, do not rely on that as your go-to point.
I was just going back to the Marcellus Shale slide in my head as you were describing that, because somebody in an emergency situation calling 911 says, I'm out by the county line. Which county?
Which county did they get when they call?
Right. You know, they don't expect it, you know, so there's a public perception on this too, because the public is probably not aware that depending on where you're at in the county, which cell tower you're gonna, you know, we can all understand, depends on which cell tower you're, but
The 911 PSAPs now, especially here and up in, I can speak to SPAG and here, their mapping system has moved ahead to light years from where it was. And I've had a communications operator that took a 911 cell phone call and pinged that phone through the 911 maps until the Jones County deputies could get within the proximity of it and found the person.
right.
Being in Sweetwater.
Is that common though, to have the E911 service phase 2 capable to be able to do cell phone tracking like that?
In this region, it's there.
Okay.
It's
that's
built
good.
into the PSAP.
It's built into our PSAP.
If the operator is capable of doing it and they catch while that person is on the phone.
And that's just it, that I'm truly blessed with my dispatchers, because I've got to get through, and they know how to work that system and make it dance. But not everybody has that.
So dispatcher
Dispatcher issues like in Coleman County, Taylor County, a lot of the bigger counties, when somebody calls in 911, they call, say there's a fire, they can pull it up GPS where that person is.
Right.
Some of the smaller counties, they have the same PSAP system, but they cannot afford to buy the GPS part of that. So they rely on what the person tells them, where are you at? So if they say 283 north, they're gonna send all the equipment 283 north. That person may be actually 283 south. Some of the smaller counties deal with that. We rely on the dispatchers to do that, but everything is verbal over the radio. So some of the smaller counties have those issues to deal with, where the bigger cities don't have to deal with that.
So understanding what the infrastructure is in the
Understanding,
PSAP.
yes, sir.
And the training of the dispatchers in those PSAPs.
Absolutely.
Is important.
I'm not in the industry, I'm a consultant, but I've worked in government for over 20 years, and very similar situation. I've worked for a time with the mayor of El Paso and the city of El Paso. And for a number of years, the EPA had wanted to implement a project that sat on both sides of the border. It was part of 2012, their EPA. It's a summary of projects they want to coordinate over the next 10 years. So obviously it's outdated now. I think it's 2022 now. But the point I'm making is, we had a similar situation. When I was with the city, we had this big flood. What happened was the city was affected on both sides of the border. We had trouble communicating with each other. Simple communication. Cell phones didn't work. We couldn't make a phone call. We realized our issue had grown into an exponential situation. We couldn't combat it. Just the simple communication killed us. So once everything cleared up, we sat down and we actually coordinated this. We found money through the DOD and through EPA. And what we ended up doing is we ended up putting together an agreement with the city of El Paso, Juarez, and the city of Sunland Park in New Mexico, 3 states in the 2 countries, in order to actually do what we needed to do. Now the reason I bring that up is that for the longest time we assumed the situation was fairly simple. You know, we had simple communication issues, simple little ones. We thought they were real tiny. The first event, major event, you're going to see your problem. It's going to grow exponentially. So what we decided to do is we put in a communications agreement. That's all it is. Simple communications agreement. And everyone has the same phone. We all use the same towers. They're specialized. They're exclusive to just emergency personnel. Well, the reason I bring this up is I travel, my consultancy's out, and I travel out to a lot of the communities. I hit a lot of little counties, a lot of little communities that have maybe 1,000 people in their 3,000 people in the entire county. They don't have the money. They don't have the volunteers to do it. In some cases, like you were saying a second ago, the towers, depending on where they're facing and whether or not the emergency responders actually, the dispatchers, identifies where that caller's coming from, that becomes a problem. But it's not just your problem. It's everybody that's around you is affected by it. Unless you get a handle on this, especially out in West Texas, where it's a real issue. The first major event, and you will see the issue grow exponentially. So you have to get a hold of it now. And again, there is funding through DOD and through EPA, if you know where to look for it. And this would be a good opportunity for someone to step up and do it.
So a couple of good points there. One, an example of what I call a specialized overlay network, specifically for emergency use.
Right.
And then the point that, and we see this there time and time again, different examples that I can give you of what was a little problem cascades into a big problem in the time of emergency. So, you know, not only planning for it, exercising it, but in order to be able to implement it, you have to look for the funding.
Well, actually, the DOD adopted it, both borders, one into the other, Mexico, U.S., Canada, U.S. They loved what we did. El Paso went a little further than normal. But what we also added, we did tabletop exercises, and we actually did simulations. We actually did the full-on, we have a major event. So we tested our event. And sure enough, we had a small episode, not quite as grand as the one that happened in '06, but we were able to realize that everything we put in place actually works. And it seems to me that this is going to get out of control pretty quick. You're already having problems now, and only a few people are in here that really knew about this event. So that's something to think about.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I think he touched on another key point. We've gotten close to it a few times, but we've always stepped around it, is those volunteers themselves. We're seeing our counties down around San Angelo having a hard time retaining volunteers to fill that first responder truck and to go out there in the day, because they are now working in the oil and gas industry. And so they don't, you just don't have the volunteers to answer the calls.
I think the numbers of calls are tremendously higher now. Where before it was, we're protecting each other's homes in the central intersection community, if you will.
Right.
And some of the numbers I've heard have been extreme. You're calling them as professionals, you're calling on them constantly.
Yeah.
So it's a different.
Okay, so the demands on the first responders are changing because of the increase in
And what they're responding
activity.
to. It's not a house fire anymore or
Right, right.
a fire.
And yet, a lot of those first responders are actually now being employed in the industry, and when they're done with the hard day's work, they don't want to go be a volunteer.
They may not
They're
be able to
used
drop
to, they're
off.
used to responding, even for the volunteer EMSs, they're used to responding to 2 calls or 3 calls a month.
Mhm.
And now because of the traffic accidents and stuff, they're responding 2 to 3 times a day.
Right.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
I-
hard to find employers willing to let
Right.
it
So
off
you
nowadays.
have employer issues, and you have volunteer, you get burnout.
Right.
Well, and I think that's something that, I don't know, I think education, maybe region-wide, I hate to say even region, I don't know what we're calling this area, but the Permian
Right.
oil play area. Because, yeah, I mean, we have my particular situation, which mimics a lot of West Texas. Small, absolutely frontier area, depends on volunteer services. Used to it was great. Our 300 people in the town and 1,200 people in the county, we could take care of whatever happened. Our town, and if you look at that report, our county's not growing. Our population has not increased. However, I guarantee if you sat at the corner and counted the amount of people in the town, it's 100 times what we actually have in the county. I mean, I bet it's 5,000 people in a day.
I think so.
And that's what we're having to take care of as an EMS service and as a fire department. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so we used to have less than 50 calls a year. And my volunteers were perfectly happy to go help Aunt Sue or Uncle Fred.
So-
And that was great. But now that it's and no offense, but some oil field guy who has drank too many energy drinks for the day and is hurting and needs EMS, they're mad because now they got to quit what they're doing and they got to go take care of this guy. And it may be the 4th call of the day that they're having to stop what they're doing to go to. And so now our runs are over 200 a year, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're talking about 20 volunteers, That's a lot.
Then you got, on the other side, that those volunteers are taking off their jobs, they're losing money, and several of them lost their jobs because they do take off. There for a little while, the state was trying to pass a bill that you could not fire a volunteer, but I don't know if it will win anywhere, but that's a reason a lot of volunteers don't volunteer. My department's a prime example. Our whole county, in Coleman County, is the same thing. So many people are afraid to lose their jobs, they won't volunteer.
Monty, that's what you're feeling down there in Atascosa, isn't it? The same kind of stress on getting volunteers?
And, you know, you can, I mean, when you look at volunteers and training, I mean, you know, our fire department, there's really no prerequisite to, you know, you want to join? Come on, we'll let you. You know, but it would be nice if some of these oil companies would recognize that and go, you know what, they do need some help. And so, you know, we could take one person from the office and train him and say, you know, you are being voluntold to be on the fire department, and you will do this. You know, I mean, that sounds very simple, but, you know, that would be one more person in the community to help with that. And I think sometimes, you know, you love the oil field and you hate them. Because they don't realize coming in, I think a lot of times the oil field doesn't realize coming in that they are putting this strain on us. And then something happens and they expect us to be able to take care of them. And that's kind of difficult.
And the lag time in the funding streams, like if you were to grow and you see those increases like we're in right now, we're feeling the pinch. Our traffic is way up, our crashes are way up, our property crimes are way up, and we're having to deal with a whole lot of stuff with staffing that hasn't increased since 1971 when Nita was shot. Staffing at the police department was 21, and here we are in 2014 and a half, and I'm at 22. And so, and now we're feeling all this additional pinch and growth and everything. However, there's no funding streams or mechanisms there to help me with the needed equipment, the needed radio infrastructure, you know, and the personnel. You know, we're years behind before we can encumber the tax dollars to hire the people to put on the streets.
No, we're talking about, I mean, from the state for EMS in particular, 36% cuts, 50% cuts for the next year from the state. And that's money, especially when you've got a volunteer organization that they depend on. And yet you're in these areas and we're losing money, but, wow, I'm probably gonna get killed before I leave here, but, yeah, you say yeah. But, you know, you go and you request, you know, funding from oil companies and say, hey, could you guys make a donation to our, because we're gonna be there for you, blah, 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 blah. And the oil field companies sometimes would rather donate to a cause that, you know, they can put their name on and really make, you know, some environmental cause. And it's like, come on,
Put your name on my fire truck.
we're little.
You need a toll road.
Yeah, the wind industry.
Yes, that's what we should do. Heck,
There
guys.
are similarities and some distinctions. I mean, you've got a known wind company's gonna be in a fixed spot. And they got incredible GPS on the load landing zones and roles for everybody, and everybody understands their role. But they donate a lot of fire trucks, and it may be that if there's an oil company that says, this is our county, we're gonna be there forever, there's more relationship as opposed to, we're drilling this rig for 3 weeks, then we're moving on to Upton County in 3 weeks. And there may not be that same identity that some of the wind companies have because this is our 50-year project. We're here, and we're dealing with your volunteer fire department and yours, but not that one. So I don't know what you do about it, where the oil companies are in the region, but they may not be, and certainly in a specific community like, you know, Mulberry Canyon as opposed to Nolan or something.
So I think this is a good point. I won't go through the other groups. I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback. But I promised you I was going to take you on a trip, right? So I want you to all stand up. First step on the trip, you have to stand up. Second step is I want you to all face the back wall.
Get with it,
Let's do it, Ken.
No sense of humor. All right.
Okay, everybody take a deep breath. Relax a little bit. Would you please turn around? I want to welcome you to the West Texas Energy Consortium of 2020. You all remember we were here 6 years ago. You can have a seat if you want. It's good to see you all again. And we're here today to celebrate success. Back in 2014, we were in this very same room. A lot of the same faces. And we talked a lot about issues that we were encountering. Right? We had a lot of problems with volunteer support. We had a lot of problems with lack of knowledge, lack of training, lack of equipment, communications. But I want to tell you that because of your hard work over the last 6 years, we've been successful. We've improved everybody's effectiveness. We have people who are happy doing what they're doing. And the question that I have for you is, what were the big things we did along the way to make it successful? Because we want to capture that and we want to celebrate that with you. So looking back here in 2020, thinking about all those things we talked about back in 2014, what were the big things that we did that made a difference? Anybody got an idea?
Improving our communication.
Improving communication. What else?
You have a consistent.
Transparency. We had transparency. How did we get transparency? Through communications. What else did we do?
Practice together, show up and discuss it.
We practiced. We took the time to show up and discuss it. So we put the problems on the table. We got the people around the table who were required to solve the problems. We talked about it. We worked through it.
They're all equipped similarly.
They're all equipped similarly, so they have the right equipment. Other ideas, other recollections on what we did to be successful.
Work together for a common good.
Work together for a common good. Did we think back in 2014 that there was a common good? I remember back then we heard a lot about everybody's problems.
We all made it a common good.
We all made it a common good.
Yeah.
All right. Was there anything we did in defining it as a common good that made a particular difference?
Maybe communicate what your common good is.
Communicate what your common good is. Have a shared vision of what it is,
Sure.
so everybody understands. Seems to me, I remember we had people that were overworked. They were used to taking care of Aunt Sally, but now they had all these new people in town. How did we change that culture?
They died off.
But we made lots of money.
We made lots of money. We got Aunt Sally to work in the oil field.
Poor Esther.
Put that together, you got everybody together the next month. Everybody that's involved in emergency management, and you regionalize it. And what you did is you found what everyone has. You kind of gave the, what's in your toolbox?
Kind of a resource.
Yeah, you
So
found out what
we-
your resources look like, and then after you did that, you pulled together what each other needs, and you worked together to get the things you needed.
So the big thing was, rather than a local solution, we expanded out and looked across a region to figure out what all common things we had, what all we needed, and looked at the resources we had,
Pulled together.
pull those together, short up the ones that we needed collectively,
That's right.
right? But we did it on a regional basis, not on a local basis. Okay.
I just think one of the things that needs to be addressed is securing funding, reliable funding.
But this is 2020, we were successful, so we must have.
Absolutely.
How did we do that?
How did we do that?
How did we do that?
That's the story for another day.
2025.
Well, I know that there were some thoughts from people back in those days, possible public-private partnerships, possibly not just local public-private partnerships, but including the state and so forth. Were we successful in doing any of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Must have been.
Must have been, because we were successful.
Yeah.
Money had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, because it doesn't go on.
That Aunt Sally, she had a lot of money.
And it's Sally. We got her working for the oil company. All the extra money she had, she put into.
Did we also engage the U.S. military that's across this whole region?
That makes sense.
Because they've got water courts, they've got deployment capabilities, do we do that? We must
Got
have done
planes.
something with them.
Where are
Yeah, DOD has funding, certainly. They have a
We heard
common
this
goal.
morning
common
about a group, the color guard that's here.
The EPA has funding.
I think probably most areas do interact with them to a certain degree, but it's really very restricted. You know, they can't always, they may have a water truck on base, but they can't always drive it off the base to go up to that fire.
Very
You know,
complicated.
I mean, sometimes they can,
Sequestration
but,
is the council.
Well, like, you know, you've got Dyess Air Force Base, a lot of our institutions.
I like this comment up here. Sequestration didn't help things back then. We got unsequestrated.
And you've got Goodfellow, but you don't have, until you get to Bliss, you really don't have any other.
You know, I gotta say one comment on the governmental part though. Back in 2010, we had the Wildcat fires. Goodfellow Air Force Base brought a lot of the crash rescue trucks, the water trucks on the base, and they came out and helped us fight fires. So on that note, they did tremendous. Now, it was took a day or two to get them out there,
Right.
but yes, they helped tremendously.
And when you utilize them, or if you're around a national park like Meredith and whatnot, you can put them on your wildland fires that frees up your resources to do destruction because they will not touch that structure, period.
A lot of it's that regional, like an inventory, if you will, of what do we have or don't have in our region.
Well,
Okay, I want to keep you all on time, and our session is over, right? I want to thank you for all your input. This is the beginning of us trying to collect information about a baseline and to help you all figure out what can be done, what needs to be done, and how we can go about doing it. So I want to thank you for your efforts here today. It has been very useful for us. And I want to thank you for that.
good job.